She was just another homeless mother on the street, until Keanu Reeves looked into her eyes and froze. 20 years ago, she saved his career. Now, she's starving, hiding, and holding a secret that could destroy a powerful man. What Keanu does next leaves the entire city speechless. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Rain fell in steady sheets over Manhattan. The streets glistened under the gray sky as wind gusts whipped discarded newspapers into the gutters. Keanu Reeves moved quietly through the crowd, hood up, head low. He had chosen to walk the last few blocks to avoid the photographers waiting near the charity venue, a quiet school fundraiser for inner-city arts programs he'd promised to support. No fanfare, just his presence. That was enough. He didn't expect the city to feel this cold in May, but it wasn't the weather that made him pause. Just before the subway steps at 59th and Lexington, a form huddled beneath a narrow awning caught his attention. A woman sat on damp cardboard, her arms wrapped around two children tucked beside her like shields against the world. She didn't beg, didn't call out, just held out a paper cup with quiet dignity. As he passed, she murmured, "God bless you." It wasn't the words that stopped him. It was the voice. Keanu slowed, blinking rain from his lashes. He turned slightly, taking in the image of the woman without drawing attention. Her coat was threadbare, her boots soaked. The older child, maybe 10, sat rigidly upright, eyes scanning passers-by like a hawk. The younger one, a girl of 6 or 7, leaned into her mother's side, holding a soaked plush rabbit by one floppy ear. Keanu took a step back, and then another. She kept her face down, but he saw it. The curve of her cheekbone, the angle of her chin, the set of her shoulders. He knew that face. Riley Ward. His breath caught. It had been over 2 decades, but he remembered. She had been fierce, full of fire, a stage actress with a voice like silk and steel. She coached him through his first serious audition, the role that changed everything. She saw something in him back then, believed in him before the rest of the world even noticed he was trying. Now she sat here, on a sidewalk, in the rain, with children who looked too still to be carefree. He moved closer. "Riley," he said softly. She flinched. Her hand immediately pulled her hood lower, hiding her face. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly. "You must be mistaken." But it was her voice again, softer, worn, but unmistakable. Keanu crouched, feeling the icy pavement soak through his jeans. He didn't care. "It's me," he said, steady and calm. "Do you remember? The Royale Theater. You threw a script at my head because I was reading it like a robot." For a heartbeat, her expression cracked. Just slightly. A flicker of recognition. Then panic returned. Her eyes darted toward the subway entrance, like she was calculating an escape route. The boy shifted. "Mom, who is this man?" Keanu smiled gently at the child, then looked back at her. "Please, just talk to me. What happened?" Behind him, footsteps. His security team, having realized he had stopped, were now approaching quickly. One of them stepped forward. "Sir, we really need to keep moving." Keanu raised a hand. "Not now." The man hesitated. People nearby had already begun to take notice. A few phones were lifted. Someone whispered, "Is that?" The boy leaned forward again. "Mom?" Keanu stayed kneeling. His voice didn't waver. "Riley, I'm not here to make a scene. Just let me help." Rain pooled around his boots. The city moved around them, oblivious. She didn't speak, but her eyes began to fill with tears. He nodded. "Please, just for a moment." She hesitated, and then, slowly, she reached for the hand he offered. The grip was faint at first. Cold fingers, shaky, as if even the act of accepting help might make the world crumble. But she didn't let go. Keanu gently rose to his feet, helping her up from the soaked cardboard. The children scrambled to their feet beside her. The boy held tightly to her coat. The girl's stuffed rabbit dangled, dripping rainwater. The security team formed a loose circle around them. One of them moved to offer an umbrella, but Keanu waved it off. He looked directly at Riley. "I have a car just down the block," he said. "Please, let me take you somewhere dry, just for a warm meal, that's all." Riley looked around, her posture stiff. Her eyes flicked to each stranger now watching them. Someone had started recording. She heard the shutter of a phone camera, the low murmur of voices. "Come on, ma'am," one of the guards said gently. "We can move fast." She still hesitated. The boy tugged her sleeve. "Mom, it's raining." "And she's cold," he said, motioning to his little sister, whose teeth were beginning to chatter. That did it. Riley's nod was almost imperceptible, but Keanu saw it. Without another word, he guided her and the kids through the crowd. The guards parted the way like water splitting around a rock. When they reached the black SUV idling near the curb, the driver was already out, holding the door open. The interior glowed softly. Warmth poured from inside. Keanu turned to the children. "What's your name?" he asked the boy. The boy didn't answer. "It's okay," Keanu said. "You don't have to talk yet, but you're safe." The little girl looked up. "Mommy, is he a movie man?" Keanu smiled gently. "I used to be." She seemed to accept that answer. One by one, they climbed inside. Riley moved slowly, clutching the backpack that looked far too light to hold a family's life. The boy sat beside her, eyes scanning every face in the car. The girl curled up against her mother's side again, rabbit clutched tightly in both arms. Keanu got in last. He didn't speak as the door shut. The world outside faded away. Inside was silence, the soft hum of the heater, and the weight of a memory returning to life. The driver waited for direction. "Take us to the Chelsea apartment," Keanu said quietly. The car pulled away from the curb. Back at the subway entrance, two men lowered their phones. One of them kept filming, even as the SUV disappeared down the wet street. "Who was that guy again?" the younger one asked. The other muttered, "Keanu Reeves, that was definitely him." "And the lady?" The older man shrugged. "Don't know. But this is going to go viral." He hit send. Inside the SUV, the ride was quiet except for the steady hum of tires on wet pavement. Riley didn't speak. She stared straight ahead, fingers clenched in her lap. The boy sat beside her, his hand never leaving his mother's coat sleeve. The little girl had already fallen asleep against her shoulder, lips parted slightly, rabbit still in her arms. Keanu sat across from them, leaning forward slightly, elbows on his knees. He didn't push, didn't flood her with questions. He just watched. Not like a movie star meeting a stranger, but like a friend finding someone they never expected to lose. Finally, he broke the silence. "Riley, I don't want to scare you, I just want to understand. How did this happen?" Her head turned a little, just enough for their eyes to meet. "You shouldn't have stopped," she whispered. "When? Because people like you don't stop, not for people like me." Keanu shook his head. "You're wrong about that. You weren't just someone. You believed in me once, when I didn't believe in myself. You made me read that scene like my soul was on fire." A flicker crossed her face. She remembered. 25 years ago, she said, almost to herself. "And you haven't left my mind since." Her lips parted, but before she could speak, the boy leaned forward. "Who are you?" he asked again, more firmly this time. Keanu looked at him. Not with amusement, but with full attention. "My name is Keanu. A long time ago, your mom helped me become who I am. And today, I think I was meant to help her back." The boy stared at him a moment, then slowly sat back, still holding his mother's sleeve. They drove the rest of the way in silence. When the SUV finally pulled up to a discreet apartment building in Chelsea, Keanu stepped out first. A private doorman nodded silently, recognizing him, but saying nothing. Keanu opened the door himself. "Come inside, just for the night. You don't have to talk, you don't have to stay, just rest." Riley looked like she might refuse, but then the girl stirred in her arms, cold cheeks against her neck. She nodded once. Keanu led them into the warmth of the building, past the marble lobby, into the elevator, and up. The elevator doors closed. Outside, the rain kept falling, but something had shifted. Not just in the sky, not just in the story, but in the quiet space between two people who once stood on the same stage and now, unknowingly, were about to take it again. Together. New York City, 1999. The rehearsal space smelled faintly of old wood and stronger coffee. Keanu, 34 at the time, stood stiffly in front of the mirror, fumbling through lines from an offbeat, emotional indie script. His shoulders were tense, his voice uncertain. The director had just told him, kindly but firmly, that if he couldn't find the emotional rhythm of the character, they'd have to go another way. He'd heard about Riley Ward from another actor, how she'd once stepped in last minute as an understudy on Broadway and brought an entire theater to tears. She wasn't famous, but she was respected, quietly powerful. So Keanu tracked her down. He found her in a sunlit back room of a theater workshop, coaching a group of young actors on Shakespearean pacing. When he asked for help, she didn't hesitate. "Show me the monologue," she said, setting down her notes. "We'll go line by line." Hours passed. Then days. She refused payment. "Just don't forget where you came from," she'd told him with a wry smile. "That's all I ask." He never did. The part he landed from that audition became a turning point in his career, not because it was his biggest role, but because it gave him the confidence to believe he could be more than a handsome face. Riley had taught him how to feel his way through a performance, not just act. Back in the present, the hum of his SUV's engine filled the silence. Keanu sat across from Riley and her two children in the back of his vehicle, a quiet cocoon of warmth and leather, as the rain drummed steadily on the roof. Riley stared out the tinted window. Her son, a boy of 9 with a fierce, wary gaze, kept one arm around his younger sister, who looked about 6. She clutched a small pink backpack and didn't speak. Riley's hair was tucked into a gray beanie, her coat too thin for the weather. She hadn't said a word since they got in. Keanu waited a few minutes, then gently broke the silence. "You were the one who taught me to breathe through nerves, to ground myself. You told me to look past the script and find the scar under every word. I never forgot that." She didn't turn. Her eyes were distant. Keanu leaned forward. "What happened, Riley?" Her shoulders stiffened. The boy's eyes narrowed. Riley shook her head. "Don't." Her voice was low, flat, a warning and a plea in one syllable. Keanu nodded slowly and sat back. No more questions. Not yet. The SUV turned down a side street, heading toward his apartment in Soho. As they approached the building, Keanu noticed her hesitate. Her hand hovered over the door handle, even though the car was still in motion. But then her son looked at her, just once, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Riley exhaled. She stayed seated. The car pulled to a stop in a private garage beneath the building. Keanu's security team opened the door, but he waved them away. "I've got it," he said softly. He stepped out, then held the door for her. Riley stepped into the dim light, holding her daughter's hand as the boy stayed protectively close to her side. Together, they followed Keanu through the elevator doors. The silence continued, but something had shifted. She was walking into warmth, and Keanu wasn't about to let her face the cold alone again. The elevator opened into a private, quiet space. Keanu's apartment didn't scream wealth. It whispered calm. Clean lines, warm woods, shelves of books, a worn guitar in the corner. No flashing portraits or awards. Just lived-in quiet. Riley's shoes left wet marks on the hardwood as she stepped in cautiously, eyes scanning like someone entering unknown territory. The boy kept his small frame in front of his sister, watching Keanu with quiet suspicion. The girl clung to her mother's coat and peeked out at the living room's soft light. Keanu knelt beside a low cabinet and opened it. "There's tea," he said, glancing up. "Or cocoa. I think I still have marshmallows." He wasn't expecting conversation. He just moved carefully, gently, like one wrong sound might shatter everything. Riley didn't respond, but after a moment she helped her children remove their coats. Keanu brought out mugs and filled the kettle. When the girl whispered something, her brother leaned down, listening. He nodded to Keanu. "She wants cocoa," the boy said simply. Then he added, almost reluctant, "Please." "Coming right up," Keanu replied, his tone soft but steady. The air warmed slowly. The rain outside tapped at the windows like a reminder of the world they'd just left behind. Keanu handed the mug to the girl and passed another to the boy, who took it with cautious hands. He gave Riley the tea last. She wrapped her fingers around the mug, letting the heat sink in. But she still didn't speak. Keanu sat across from her at the wide kitchen table, giving her space. He studied her face in the light. The years had carved new lines, yes, but her eyes, those eyes, still held the same fire. Dimmed, but not gone. "You saved me," he said, voice low. "I didn't know how to show up until you showed me how." Riley looked up at him, finally, and in her eyes was something close to apology, maybe even shame. "I didn't fall from grace," she said. Her voice cracked, then steadied. "I was pushed." Keanu didn't flinch. "Then we push back together." She stared at him, as if trying to believe he meant it, as if trying to remember what hope sounded like. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, very quietly, she asked, "Why are you doing this?" "Because you mattered when I didn't," Keanu replied. "And because I remember everything." Riley's hand trembled slightly as she set the tea down. She leaned back against the chair, as if her body had just realized it was safe enough to stop holding itself up. Her son watched her, still guarded, but he was listening. She whispered, "I was supposed to go back on stage. I had an offer, but then everything—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Keanu didn't press. The boy finally spoke. "Are we staying here?" Keanu looked at Riley. "That's up to your mom." Riley looked at both of her children, then back to Keanu. "We'll stay, just for tonight." Keanu nodded. But he knew this was the beginning of something much longer than a night. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep on the couch under warm blankets, Riley stood by the window, arms crossed over her chest. She looked out over the city, watching the blur of headlights and the shimmer of rain on glass. Keanu joined her in silence, holding 2 refilled mugs. He handed her one without a word. "Thank you," she said, eyes still on the streets below. "For what?" he asked quietly. "For not asking too much, for not making me feel like a problem to fix." Keanu let that sit. Then he said, "When you helped me all those years ago, you didn't treat me like a kid who didn't belong. You treated me like a peer. Like I had a voice worth hearing." "You did," Riley replied softly. "You just didn't know it yet." "Neither did you," he said, glancing at her. She turned to him, and something fragile flickered behind her eyes. "I was supposed to be somebody," she whispered. "I had momentum, reviews, I was getting callbacks for roles that mattered, but then my mother got sick. I left the city to take care of her, and when I came back, everything had moved on without me." She paused, and then came the man who said all the right things, until he didn't. Keanu didn't press. He just waited. Riley took a breath. "The kids are mine, always have been. But the house, the car, the reputation, he stripped those piece by piece. And when I tried to leave, he made sure no one would believe me. I went from almost making a name to begging churches for food stamps. Keanu's jaw tightened. Riley laughed once, dry and quiet. You'd be amazed how fast people forget your name when you're not useful to them anymore. I didn't forget, Keanu said. She looked at him. Her mouth trembled slightly before she caught it. I don't know how to rebuild, she admitted. I don't know if it's even possible. Keanu leaned back slightly against the wall. I think it starts with not doing it alone. Riley looked down at her tea, then at the blankets on the couch where her kids lay asleep. We've never had a real bed 2 nights in a row, she said. Bailey will now, Keanu promised. She nodded once, holding his gaze for a second longer than before. And then, as if giving herself permission to believe it, she said, Okay. He smiled, just a little. We made a pact once, remember? She nodded slowly. He extended his hand across the space between them, glared in shock. Let's keep it. This time, she took it. The room had grown quiet. The tea sat untouched between them, the steam having faded into stillness. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, giving Riley space but offering presence. Riley's eyes were on the floor, her fingers laced together, thumbs nervously tracing one another. I left the stage the year after you got your first big break, she said finally, her voice low and even. Not because I lost passion, not because I wasn't good enough, but because I married someone who made me feel smaller every time I succeeded. Keanu's eyes narrowed with concern. Ethan, she continued. You remember him, right? Ethan Ward. Directed those 2 summer blockbusters, then pivoted to Broadway for a while. Keanu gave a small nod. He remembered Ethan all too well. Polished, charming, with a sly condescension that barely hid his appetite for control. I met him during rehearsals for A Streetcar Named Desire, Riley said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. He said I made Blanche Dubois feel like a breathing woman, not a symbol. I thought that meant something. She swallowed hard. Hell proposed after 6 months. Said I had the soul of a mother and the fire of an artist. I believed him. Keanu didn't interrupt. At first, it was small things. He wanted me to cut back on auditions, said the roles I deserved weren't being written yet, that I was above it all. Then he didn't like the hours I kept, the people I worked with, the way my agent pushed for certain scripts. Her voice cracked a little. Then one night, after I got an offer from a television drama, just 1 season, a recurring role, he said it would embarrass him. He said if I loved him, I'd walk away from it. Keanu's expression was pained, his hands clasped together. I did. And that was the beginning of the end of me, at least professionally. She looked up at him then, eyes damp but focused. He convinced me I was better off being a mother, that the girls in his films were replaceable but our family wasn't. I gave up callbacks. Then I gave up stage work. Then I gave up coaching. She let out a bitter breath. Eventually I gave up asking him for permission at all. Keanu's voice was soft. When did it turn abusive? Riley looked away. 2 years after I gave birth to Ivy, our youngest. He'd just come back from Sundance, drunk on praise and whiskey. I mentioned I wanted to start auditioning again. He didn't yell. He didn't hit. He laughed. She paused. Then he said I'd aged out of roles anyone would care about, that the only curtain call I had left was making dinner on time. Keanu felt a tightness in his chest he hadn't expected. Riley stood and walked slowly toward the window, her back to Keanu, her voice steadier now. Ethan's, it never left me. Even when he stopped pretending to be kind, that was what echoed. Not the yelling, not the slamming doors. The laugh. Like I was ridiculous for dreaming I still mattered. She turned slightly, her eyes catching the faint reflection of herself in the glass. After that night, things got worse. Subtle at first. He'd forget to tell me about school events. He'd change plans last minute. then blamed me for not adapting. Then came the threats. If I ever left, he said he'd take the kids, that no judge would side with a jobless former actress who'd mentally checked out of life. And if I tried to speak out, he'd destroy what little credibility I had left. Keanu leaned forward, resting his chin on his clasped hands. "You were silenced." She nodded. "And erased." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "When I finally filed for separation, he called every casting director I'd ever worked with. Claimed I was unstable, that I was using drugs. He even accused me of being violent with the children, said it was why he needed full custody." Keanu's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. I couldn't afford a lawyer strong enough to fight him, not with the connections he had. So he got what he wanted. Temporarily, he said, for stability. Her voice broke slightly. But stability wasn't the goal. It was control. He left the city 2 weeks later, left the girls with his mother for a while, then just disappeared. She finally turned to face Keanu again. By the time I tracked him down, he'd emptied our joint account, vanished from the industry press, and was living overseas with a much younger actress. Keanu felt fury welling in his throat. "He abandoned his own children." Riley nodded. "And the system barely blinked. I filed a motion to regain custody, but the court system moves slow, especially when you're homeless, unemployed, and your ex knows how to manipulate records." She drew a trembling breath. "For 6 months now, we've been living wherever we can. Shelters when they have room, subways when they don't. I try to keep the kids clean, safe, learning. But they're tired. And I'm ashamed." Keanu stood and walked toward her. His voice was low. "Why didn't you call me?" Riley looked up at him, tears finally slipping free. "Because I didn't think you'd remember me. I didn't think you'd care." He shook his head slowly, voice raw. "You were unforgettable." Keanu stepped closer, but stopped just short of touching her. "I don't forget people who lift others up when no one's watching, especially not the person who believed in me before the world did." Riley tried to smile, but it wavered. "It's strange. I spent years trying to disappear, and yet, part of me kept waiting, hoping someone might still see me." "You're not invisible," Keanu said gently. "You were buried. There's a difference." She let that truth settle in the silence, her shoulders dropping an inch as if she'd just set down something heavy. "The kids deserve more than this. I've tried, God knows I've tried, but I can't give them what they need. And I've run out of options." "You haven't," Keanu said. "Steady now. You still have me." Riley studied his face. "You're a movie star. You don't owe me anything." "I don't think this is about owing," he replied. "This is about a promise I should have made a long time ago." She looked at him again, this time without flinching. Keanu continued, "You helped shape the man I became, not just as an actor, as a person. You didn't just teach me how to stand in a scene, you taught me how to stand up for something real." Riley's eyes welled again, but this time it was different. Not from pain, from something approaching relief. He stepped forward and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "I'm going to help you stand up again. For yourself, for your kids. We'll figure this out. But you're not doing it alone anymore." There was a long pause. Then Riley whispered, "You don't know what you're stepping into." Keanu nodded. "Maybe not. But I know what happens if I walk away." She exhaled slowly, her whole body sagging just slightly. "Okay," she said, almost too quiet to hear. "Okay." From the hallway, the sound of little footsteps padded toward them. Her son peeked in first, holding his sister's hand behind him. "Mom," he said softly, "we heard you crying. Are you okay?" Riley turned, wiping her face. "Yeah, baby. I think we're going to be okay now." Keanu gave the boy a nod. "You hungry?" The boy hesitated, then nodded slowly. Keanu smiled. "Come on, Let's get you some dinner." As the children stepped into the room, Riley stayed still a moment longer, watching them. Then she followed, her hand brushing lightly against Keanu's arm as they walked toward the kitchen, toward something that, for the first time in a long while, looked like the beginning of hope. Riley stood in the doorway of the safe house, her children close beside her, their eyes wide. The space was warm and quiet, filled with soft light from lamps rather than harsh overhead fixtures. The living room had a large overstuffed couch, a basket of toys in the corner, and the smell of something gently spiced drifting in from the kitchen. There were blankets folded neatly over the arm of the couch, pillows with no dust. A hallway stretched beyond, leading to 2 bedrooms and a small study. Keanu stepped back, giving Riley space to enter on her own terms. She hesitated, not because she didn't trust him, somehow she did, but because it felt too good to be real. Her feet remained rooted to the welcome mat. Then her daughter tugged at her hand. "Mommy, can we sit down?" That broke the spell. Riley gave a tiny nod, and they stepped inside. The children moved carefully, unsure if they were allowed to touch anything. Keanu smiled gently and pointed toward the couch. "Go ahead, it's all yours." The boy, a quiet 9-year-old who hadn't said much since that morning, perched on the edge. His little sister crawled up beside him, wrapping herself in one of the soft blankets. Her eyes closed halfway, for the first time all day. Riley looked around like a woman remembering how to breathe. The heater kicked on with a low hum. Her shoulders began to relax, almost imperceptibly. Grace, Keanu's longtime assistant, arrived moments later. She brought a basket of fresh clothes for the children, sizes estimated but close enough. Pajamas with cartoon dinosaurs and pastel stars, warm socks, toothbrushes still in their wrappers, a few books and coloring sets, even a stuffed penguin. Riley opened her mouth to speak, but her voice caught. She turned away quickly, biting her lip to stop the tears. Grace gently touched her shoulder. "There's a shower down the hall, clean towels under the sink. We stocked the fridge, too. Just tell me what your kids like, and I'll get more." Keanu stood quietly at a distance, watching her without pressure. When she finally turned to him, her eyes were red but steadier. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Because no one did it for you when they should have," he answered simply. She said nothing, just nodded, once. After helping the kids wash up and change into warm pajamas, Riley tucked them into the bedroom down the hall. The boy was slow to settle. He watched the windows, unsure. Riley sat beside him, whispering reassurances until his breathing slowed. The little girl clutched her new penguin tight, her head resting against a soft pillow she hadn't had to fight for. Within minutes, she was asleep. Riley stayed there for a long time, not moving, her hand on the blanket, her eyes on their small, sleeping forms. Only when the room fell completely still did she let the tears come. Quiet, unshaken, like a dam carefully released. Keanu stepped quietly into the kitchen, giving Riley space. Grace followed him, her tablet in hand, brows slightly furrowed. She waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. "I ran a full scan like you asked," she said quietly. "Ethan Ward filed for emergency custody 3 days ago, claimed Riley abandoned the children and is mentally unstable. He's trying to get a fast-track judgment." Keanu's jaw clenched. "Did it go through?" "Not yet," Grace said. "The court gave him a hearing date next week. But I've seen this kind of move before. He's laying the groundwork for full guardianship. If he finds her first and spins the narrative, he could get it." Keanu crossed his arms and leaned against the counter. "And what about Riley's name? Has he flagged her in any legal or surveillance systems?" "Held tried," Grace replied. "He submitted a private locator request through a network of attorneys, but I blocked it. We've scrubbed her digital footprint since you brought her in. He can't trace her location unless someone talks." "Hell will try," Keanu said, voice low. "Hell always does," Grace added, nodding. "But we're not going to let him win." Keanu nodded once, then asked, "Did you get the therapist?" "She'll be here tomorrow morning," Trauma informed, specializes in children who've seen conflict. "The kids will talk when they're ready. She'll meet Riley, too." "Jen and security?" "Tight. Property belongs to your foundation's umbrella. No press links. I've added off-the-books patrols at the front and back. Full non-disclosure from every vendor." "It's locked down, Keanu." "Good," he murmured. "They need peace, even if it's only for a little while." They stood in silence for a beat, the kind of silence that knew how fragile peace could be. Back in the hallway, Riley stepped out of the kids' room, her eyes damp but clearer. She looked around the safe house like she wasn't sure if it was still real. Keanu motioned to the small dining nook, already set with hot tea, apples, and honey biscuits. Riley sat down slowly, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, she whispered the sentence she hadn't dared say aloud in months. "He'll find us." Keanu didn't flinch. Let him try. Her eyes met his, tired, fragile, but still lit by a flicker of defiance. "He always does. He's got people, cameras, lawyers, friends in high places." "So do I," Keanu said softly. She blinked. "You're not scared of him?" "I'm not scared of men who prey on women who shine brighter than they do," he replied, steady and calm. Something inside her seemed to settle, like an anchor dropped in a storm. Not safety yet, but the beginning of safety, the promise of it. Riley looked down at her tea, then back at the hallway. "My daughter smiled tonight. I didn't think she remembered how." Keanu nodded. "She'll smile again. So will you." This time, Riley didn't argue. Later that night, the house had gone quiet. The kind of stillness that comes after exhaustion, not peace. The kind that feels borrowed. Riley stood in the doorway of the kids' room, watching them sleep. Her daughter, Harper, had curled into a tight ball, clutching the stuffed elephant Keanu had quietly placed on the pillow earlier. Ben, her son, lay with one arm draped protectively over her, the same way he had on the sidewalk. Riley watched their chests rise and fall in rhythm and felt a wave of guilt crash through her. She had failed them, over and over, in courtrooms, in back alleys, in every moment she couldn't protect them from a world that had turned its back on them. She closed the door gently and padded barefoot into the hallway, guided only by the dim light in the kitchen. Keanu was still up, seated on the far end of the couch with a notebook open in his lap. He wasn't writing, just staring at the page, pen in hand, as if trying to solve a puzzle he didn't want to finish. "I didn't know where else to go," Riley said softly. Keanu looked up, closed the notebook. "You came to the right place." She sat down at the opposite end of the couch, knees pulled up, her arms hugging them loosely. "I'm so used to surviving that I forgot what being safe feels like." "I get that," Keanu said. "Took me years to believe I deserved peace too." Riley glanced over at him. "Did you ever feel invisible?" He paused. "Yeah, especially in rooms where I was supposed to be seen." Riley nodded. "That's how it was with Ethan. He didn't just want control, he wanted silence. He wanted me to doubt my own voice." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "But you didn't let him take it." "No," she said after a moment, "but I almost gave it away." There was a long pause between them, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Then Riley took a deep breath and asked the question that had haunted her the most. "Do you really think this'll work? That he won't find us?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He leaned back, eyes steady. "I think the first thing he's going to learn is that you're not alone anymore." Riley's eyes brimmed again. Not from fear this time. From something older, something more dangerous to the darkness. She stood up, hesitated for a moment, and said quietly, "Good night." Keanu offered a small nod. "Good night, Riley." When she returned to the kids' room, she lay down between them, arms around both. For the first time in months, she didn't cry from fear or failure. She wept from the weight of finally feeling held by kindness, by memory, by the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this time, they would be okay. Behind her, the streetlights outside the window burned low and steady, and somewhere deeper than sleep, something inside her exhaled. The morning began quietly. The children were still asleep, curled up in fresh pajamas, soft breaths rising and falling in the comfort of clean sheets. Riley stood near the window of the safe house, arms wrapped around herself, looking out at the stillness. For the first time in months, there was no siren in the distance, no shout in the alley, no creeping sense of being hunted. Keanu stepped into the room, holding 2 mugs of tea. He offered one to her without a word, his expression gentle. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. But that moment of calm didn't last. Across the city, a security assistant, young, new, and starstruck, had made a critical mistake. While organizing footage from the night before, he had paused on one frame. It was blurry, but the moment it captured said everything. Keanu Reeves, kneeling beside a homeless woman with 2 children under a subway entrance in the rain. The humanity of it was striking. Thinking nothing of it, he cropped the image and shared it with a small, fan-run Instagram account. "Keanu helps homeless mom in NYC? Real hero," the caption read. The post was live for less than 15 minutes before it began spreading like wildfire. By noon, it was on Twitter's trending page. A TikTok creator had already edited it into a 30-second tribute with emotional music. And within an hour, the story was on TMZ's radar. Keanu's phone buzzed non-stop. His PR manager, Danny, called 3 times before he answered. Her voice came sharp. "Keanu, tell me this isn't you. Please tell me someone faked this photo." "It's me," he said calmly. "And? I'm not sorry." "Okay," she sighed, trying to stay professional. "Then we need to prepare a statement. This looks like a charity stunt unless we shape the narrative." He paused, then said clearly, "We're not shaping anything. There's no damage, only truth." Danny went quiet. "This is going to make waves. You'll be asked questions. This isn't going away." "Then let them ask," Keanu replied. "But I'm not hiding kindness." Back at the safe house, Grace had just finished running a background scan on Ethan when her phone pinged. She glanced down, saw the image, and her stomach dropped. "Riley," she said carefully, walking into the room, "you need to see something." Riley took the tablet from her hand. The moment her eyes landed on the screen, the color drained from her face. It was the photo. The subway, the children, her. She froze. "I didn't post it," Keanu said quickly, approaching. "Someone on the team made a mistake." Riley's voice cracked as she whispered, "He'll see it. Ethan will see this." Keanu looked her in the eyes. "Then let him." Riley's hands trembled as she placed the tablet on the table, backing away from it like it might explode. Her voice was hollow. "You don't know what he's capable of, Keanu. I've seen what he does when he's cornered." Keanu stood still, letting her panic run its course. Then he moved toward her, steady and grounded. "Riley," he said softly, "you're not cornered anymore." She looked up at him. Her eyes were glassy, filled with years of fear layered over months of exhaustion. "He's a director, a manipulator. He doesn't need to yell. He turns people against you with a smile. He makes the world believe you're the unstable one." Keanu nodded. "I believe you." She blinked. "You don't have to convince me," he added. "Not now, not ever." A long silence passed between them. Then her 9-year-old son stepped into the room. Elijah had overheard more than either of them realized. He looked up at Keanu, then turned to his mother. "Are we going to have to run again?" Riley's face broke. She knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his small body. "No," Keanu answered for her. You're not running anymore." At that moment, Grace returned from the other room with a laptop. "Ethan's legal team just filed an emergency custody motion," she said. It was time-stamped 10 minutes after the photo went viral. Riley slumped back on her heels. He was waiting for this, just waiting for an excuse. Keanu moved closer. "Let's give him something else, something he's not expecting." "What's that?" Grace asked. "Resistance," he replied. "We don't hide. We build a case. We shine light on him." Grace raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're ready for that kind of public storm?" Keanu nodded. "I'm not the one who's been hiding in fear. Riley has, and she doesn't deserve that anymore." Riley looked at him. The silence between them was heavier now, charged not with fear, but something close to hope. She whispered, "What if I'm not strong enough?" Keanu answered without hesitation, "You don't have to be. I'll carry the weight until you are." The words didn't land like a promise. They landed like truth. Outside, a car rolled by slowly. One of the bodyguards shifted position near the driveway. The quiet around the safe house had taken on a new tension, like the air before a storm. But inside, something had shifted. Riley stood up. Her son took her hand. Her daughter peeked around the corner, holding a stuffed rabbit. "We stay," Riley said, her voice steadier. "We face it." Keanu gave her a quiet nod. "Good," he said, "because we're just getting started." The next morning, headlines buzzed across every major outlet. Social media was flooded with commentary, ranging from praise to wild speculation. Keanu Reeves seen helping homeless woman? Hero or hidden scandal? Who is the mystery mother with Keanu in Manhattan? Some claimed it was part of a movie. Others said he was adopting a single mom and her children. The frenzy only grew. Keanu sat in the kitchen, his coffee untouched. Grace was on the phone in the adjacent room, her voice crisp, as she coordinated with legal counsel and a private investigator. Riley sat beside the kids at the breakfast table, silently cutting pancakes. The room was brighter than it had been the day before, but her expression remained guarded. Her son Elijah watched her closely. Her daughter, Mia, still clung to her stuffed rabbit, eating slowly, still trying to make sense of what stability even meant. Keanu finally broke the silence. "The story's out. We can't put it back in the box." Riley didn't flinch. "What does that mean for the kids?" "It means Ethan's going to act fast, and we have to be faster." Grace stepped back in. "We've already filed a counter-motion. Our attorneys are asking the court to freeze any custody proceedings until a full psychiatric and domestic violence investigation can be completed." Riley looked at her sharply. "That will make him furious." "Good," Keanu said. "Let him show who he really is." Riley looked at him, her voice low. "You still don't understand how far his reach goes. Judges, agents, even some child welfare officers. He's played this game longer than any of us." "That's why we're not playing his game," Keanu replied. "We're rewriting the rules." Outside, more media vans had arrived. They hadn't found the exact location yet, but drone footage and tabloid blogs were beginning to close in. Grace had already arranged to relocate them again by nightfall. Then a new notification popped up on Keanu's tablet. TMZ, front page, a clearer version of the original clip. Now Riley's face was visible. Her stomach dropped. She didn't even need to open the article. "It's out," she whispered. Keanu's phone rang, his publicist. He let it go to voicemail. "I can't do this," Riley said suddenly, standing. "I thought I could, but I can't have my face out there. I can't have Mia and Elijah dragged into this circus." Keanu stood too, firm and calm. "It's already happening. You can either run from it or stand in front of it and make it mean something." She stared at him, and he added, "You're not the woman in that clip. You're not a scandal or a victim. You're their mother, and you're about to become the one who fought back." Riley's eyes burned, but she didn't blink. She slowly sat back down and nodded. The call came in just after midnight. Keanu was alone in his apartment, the city outside cloaked in silence, broken only by the hum of distant traffic. The screen lit up with a number he didn't recognize, but he answered anyway. Something in his gut told him exactly who it was. The gravel-thick voice greeted him. Calm, slow, calculated. "You have no idea what you've stepped into, Mr. Reeves." Keanu didn't flinch. "Ethan, I want you to understand something," Ethan continued, the composure in his voice disguising the venom underneath. "That woman you're parading around like some pet project, she's mentally unstable. I have years of legal documentation. She vanished, took the children, and now I'm filing for full custody. You're interfering with a pending court case." Keanu didn't respond right away. He let the silence hang, deliberately. Then, with steady clarity, he said, "I'm not afraid of you. I'll sue you," Ethan hissed. "For interference, for defamation, for every dime you've ever made." Keanu's voice didn't rise. "Try it." And he hung up. Across town, Grace was already digging. Keanu's longtime assistant was calm under pressure and thorough beyond belief. She'd spent the last few days combing through legal archives and industry contacts, looking for anything that might explain why Riley had disappeared so completely from public life. That night, she found it. A sealed file buried in the personal archives of a now defunct theater production company. Grace had to pull strings to access it. Inside, a report Riley had filed 8 years ago, naming Ethan for emotional cruelty, manipulation, and professional retaliation. Attached was a signed confidentiality agreement and a substantial payout, marked as transition compensation. It was the paper trail no one thought would ever surface. Keanu's jaw clenched as he read the documents the next morning. It was all there, the quiet truth that Riley had once tried to stand up for herself and been silenced. He paced the kitchen and the safe house, the folder open on the marble counter. Riley was sitting nearby, a cup of untouched tea between her hands. She hadn't spoken in 10 minutes. Finally, she asked, barely above a whisper, "Is that what you needed? Proof I wasn't making it all up?" "No," Keanu said, lowering himself across from her. "I believed you the second you told me, but now the world can too." She shook her head, eyes closing. "I can't go through that again. The cameras, the questions, the pity." Keanu leaned forward. "Then we do it on our terms, quietly, safely, with someone we trust." That's when he pulled out his phone and made the call. To a name Riley hadn't heard in years. A name the media respected. A friend Keanu trusted with the truth. A journalist who never flinched at power, only at silence. Her name was Marianne Keller, and she was already on her way. Marianne Keller arrived that afternoon, stepping into the safe house with the steady confidence of someone who'd spent decades peeling back layers of public lies. She greeted Keanu with a firm handshake, then turned to Riley, offering no assumptions, only space. "I'm here when you're ready," she said simply. Riley eyed her warily. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, knuckles pale. "I haven't spoken publicly in 10 years, she said. "Not once. I stopped using my real name. I stopped looking in mirrors. I stopped believing anyone would care." Marianne didn't push. "And still, you survived." There was no studio setup, no spotlight. Just Marianne, a voice recorder, a notebook, and the soft glow of afternoon light filtering through the curtains. Keanu stood nearby, arms crossed, silent but present. The children were in the next room, with Grace, drawing on a tablet. Riley hesitated. Then she whispered, "He told me I wasn't real." Marianne leaned in. "Tell me what that means." Riley's voice shook as she explained. "Ethan had this phrase. Whenever I questioned him, whenever I got angry or confused, he'd say, 'You're not real. You're just a version of me I created.'" She paused, chest rising and falling. It started with words. Then came the silence. Then came the control. My phone, my money, my scripts, even what I wore. He told producers I had breakdowns. He took over my email. When I tried to audition again, I was dropped mid-contract. And when I finally left, he made sure I couldn't work again. Not in this city, not anywhere. The room stayed still. Marianne didn't interrupt. She just nodded, scribbling carefully. Riley's voice dropped lower. He filed a petition the day I left, told the court I was dangerous, that I was delusional and unstable. He knew which judge would sign it, his old law school friend. That's how he got the children. That's how he made it all disappear. Keanu's fist tightened. Riley wiped her cheek. But then, he didn't want them. After a year, he dropped them off with a sitter and vanished. No money, no contact, just a letter. You always wanted to be the martyr. Enjoy it. Keanu took a step forward. You don't need to carry that alone anymore. Riley looked up at Marianne. And what if I say this on camera? What happens then? The headlines? The trolls? The doubt? You think the truth will save me? Marianne closed her notebook softly. No, the truth won't save you. But it might save the next woman. And it might finally show the world who he really is. Riley sat back. And for the first time in weeks, her breathing slowed. I'm not ready yet, she said. That's fine, Marianne replied. But when you are, we do it your way. Riley nodded. I'll let you know. That night, after Marianne left, the safe house settled into silence. The children were asleep. The city lights blinked faintly in the distance. Keanu sat in the kitchen, nursing a mug of lukewarm tea, watching the hallway where Riley had disappeared hours earlier. He didn't expect her to return, but she did. Barefoot, shoulders hunched in one of the clean sweaters Grace had brought, Riley stepped into the doorway. Her eyes were red, but her voice was clear. Tomorrow, she said. Let's record it tomorrow. Keanu stood. Are you sure? No, she replied, but I'm more sure than I've ever been. He crossed the room slowly. I'll be there, every second. Riley looked at him. Promise me something. Anything. If I break, she whispered. If I fall apart halfway through, don't try to fix it, just... I will. She turned, pausing at the doorway. Keanu? Yeah. You really think people will care? He nodded. I don't think. I know. The next morning, Marianne returned with her equipment. Still simple, unobtrusive. No makeup artist. No lights. Just a neutral couch and the raw presence of a woman reclaiming her voice. Riley sat down and looked into the camera. My name is Riley Ward, she began. I disappeared because I thought I had no voice. Today, I'm taking it back. Marianne gave her a small nod. The camera rolled, and Riley kept talking. 42 minutes. No breaks. No edits. Just the truth, unfolding like a wound, finally allowed to breathe. She spoke of Ethan's manipulation, the nights he locked her out of their home, the days she was denied access to her children, the lawyers who stopped returning her calls, and the agents who ghosted her the moment his name came up. She spoke of the fall from fame, but more importantly, she spoke of surviving it. By the time the interview ended, there was no dry eye in the room. Not even Keanu's. When Riley stood, her legs trembled, but her posture was taller than it had been in weeks. Marianne stood too. We'll cut it into a short doc, she said. Under 10 minutes. Then we release it, on your terms. Let's do it, Riley answered. Marianne paused, then extended a small envelope. We reopened the file. Riley frowned. What file? The sealed one. Your original complaint. It wasn't just a confidentiality clause. Someone classified it under privileged celebrity arbitration, but we found the judge, and he's willing to talk. Riley stared. Keanu stepped beside her. You're not just speaking now, you're building a case. Riley didn't say anything for a long time. Then she exhaled. Good. As Marianne packed up and left, Keanu lingered in the kitchen again. This time Riley joined him, no words. Just quiet. Real, calm quiet. Then she reached for his hand, and this time she didn't let go. The soft glow of studio lights cast a warm halo around Riley's face. She sat upright in the armchair, hands folded tightly in her lap, but her shoulders held a subtle defiance. The room was quiet, intentionally so. Just a camera, a microphone, and a trusted documentary filmmaker named Lena, who had been personally invited by Keanu. Outside the frame, Keanu stood silently near the far wall, arms crossed. His jaw was tight. He didn't interrupt. He didn't guide. He just listened. Riley glanced at the lens, then looked away. "Take your time," Lena said gently. "There's no rush." Riley nodded, her eyes flicking down toward the worn bracelet on her wrist. She rubbed it once, a nervous tick, then inhaled. "I was never supposed to be a mother," she began softly. "That's what Ethan told me the first time I got pregnant. Said I wasn't built for it. Said I'd ruin the child." A pause. "But I had her, my daughter, and then my son, and despite everything he said, I was good at it. I loved them. I loved them more than anything." Her voice wavered. "I gave up everything for them, my career, my name, my peace of mind. And in return, I got silence. I got forgotten." She looked straight into the camera now, no longer blinking away. People think abuse is all bruises and broken bones, but it's not. Sometimes it's words, sometimes it's power. Ethan had all of it, the money, the charm, the reputation. I was just the woman who cried too loud in the kitchen. Keanu shifted. His hand tightened into a fist by his side, then relaxed. His face remained calm, but the red at the rims of his eyes betrayed him. Riley's voice grew firmer. "I used to think if I just stayed quiet, he'd change. If I folded small enough, he'd stop needing to control everything. But the more I disappeared, the more he pushed. And one day, I didn't recognize myself anymore." The room held its breath. "My children saw me fall apart. That's something no mother wants. But then they saw me stand back up. And that's what matters now." At the edge of the doorway, two small faces peeked through. The kids. No one called them in, but they didn't move. They watched quietly as their mother, who once flinched at loud noises and shadows, now sat beneath a spotlight, speaking like a storm with purpose. "I'm not broken," Riley said, voice steady now. "I was bent, but I'm still standing. And I'm speaking. Not just for me, but for every woman who didn't think she was worth being remembered." The camera blinked red, recording. Off-screen, Lena slowly lowered her head in reverence. Keanu didn't speak. He couldn't. His chest rose once, deeply, then fell, as if something heavy had finally been set down. "He's like a force of nature," Lena whispered later. Keanu didn't hesitate. "She always was." The interview continued, but something had shifted. Riley wasn't just answering questions anymore. She was reclaiming space. Her tone changed, more confident with each word. "I wasn't born brave," she said when asked about survival, "but being a mother teaches you. When you're all they have, you learn how to stand tall, even when your knees want to buckle." She paused, swallowing hard. "I remember one night we were sleeping in the subway. I had both kids curled up against me, and this man walked by, drunk. He stopped and laughed and said, 'Actress, huh? Guess you're not on stage anymore.' I just held my kids tighter and kept my mouth shut." But that sentence haunted me for weeks. She glanced toward the hallway where her children had been watching. "I didn't lose my stage. I gave it away to keep them safe. But now, I'm taking it back." Lena leaned in slightly. "Do you think people will believe you after all this time?" "I don't need everyone to believe me," Riley answered. "I just need one girl watching this who thinks she's alone to know she's not. If she sees herself in my story, then this," she motioned around the studio, "was worth it." Behind the camera, the sound tech slowly wiped a tear from his cheek. Lena's assistant, a young woman in her 20s, was openly crying. In the corner, Keanu stared down at the floor, blinking rapidly. After a brief pause, Lena asked one final question. "If you could say one thing to Ethan, what would it be?" Riley inhaled. Long, slow. Then she stared directly into the lens. "You don't own me anymore." A beat of silence followed. "Not my time, not my story, not my name." Her hands tightened briefly in her lap. "You took my voice for years, but you forgot I was trained to project. You can't silence me anymore." When Lena called cut, no one moved at first. The silence in the room was heavy, not awkward, but full. Full of awe, of grief, of something sacred. Riley looked down, breath catching, then let her shoulders drop. Keanu stepped forward. He didn't say anything at first. He just reached out and placed a warm hand on her shoulder. She leaned into it, letting herself rest for just a moment. "You were incredible," Lena finally said. "I wasn't trying to be," Riley replied. "I was just honest." "That's why it worked," Lena said softly. "Truth has weight, and you just shifted something." The kids ran up to their mother then, wrapping their arms around her waist. She hugged them tight, burying her face in their hair. Keanu watched it all with quiet reverence. No applause, no speech, just presence. The crew began packing up slowly, as if afraid to break the energy in the room. "I've filmed 100 interviews," Lena whispered to Keanu. "That was the one I'll remember forever." Outside the studio, the sun had already dipped behind the buildings, casting the city in a hazy twilight. Riley stepped out onto the quiet rooftop terrace, just off the editing room. She needed air. Something still, something clean. Keanu followed a few steps behind her, giving her space but not letting her stand alone. She gripped the railing, her knuckles white. The interview had taken something from her, but it had also returned something greater. "You okay?" Keanu asked gently. She nodded without looking at him. "I didn't expect it to hit like that." He moved closer, resting his arms on the railing beside her. "It hit because it mattered. You didn't just tell your story. You gave others permission to speak." Riley blinked hard. "Do you think it'll make a difference?" Keanu looked at her then, really looked at her. The lines in her face, the grit beneath the grace. "It already has," he said. Inside, Lena and her assistant reviewed the raw footage. Even unedited, the clarity and power of Riley's words cut through every distraction. Lena paused the video midway through Riley's final statement and sat in silence. "We can't bury this in post-production polish," she told her assistant. "We're not editing a story. We're documenting a reckoning." Back on the terrace, Riley took a deep breath and finally smiled. Small, real, worn at the edges, but there. "I was afraid I'd freeze up," she admitted. "But once I started talking, it was like remembering how to breathe." "You never forgot," Keanu said quietly. "You just held your breath for too long." She turned toward him, eyes tired but steady. "I used to think that being invisible kept us safe," she said. "But silence lets people like Ethan thrive. Maybe it's time we stop thinking safety means hiding." Keanu nodded. "You didn't hide today. You stood taller than anyone I've seen in years." She gave a soft laugh. "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I do," he said, with such calm sincerity that she looked away, overcome. Moments later, the kids came out to the terrace. Zoe wrapped her arms around her mother's waist again, while Liam leaned against Keanu's side, unusually quiet. "Mom," Zoe whispered, "I saw you on the camera. You were so brave." Riley knelt down and touched her daughter's cheek. "I was scared, baby." "But you did it anyway," Liam said, eyes filled with awe. Riley pulled them both close, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like she was pretending to be strong. She simply was. Behind them, Lena stepped onto the terrace. "We're going to start editing tonight," she said, "but I'll send you the first cut before anything goes public." Riley stood, hands still on her children's shoulders. "Thank you, Lena, for seeing me." Lena shook her head. "You made yourself seen. That takes more courage than most people will ever understand." As night settled around them, the lights of the city blinked on, one by one. Somewhere in the darkness, Riley's voice had started echoing. And this time, the world would hear it. The sun had barely risen when Ethan appeared on national television. Clean-shaven, wearing a navy blazer and a somber expression, he sat across from the morning show host like a wounded man. His voice cracked as he spoke about his concern for the children, framing himself as the loving father blindsided by a deeply disturbed woman who had vanished with their kids. He claimed Riley was addicted to prescription pills, mentally unwell, and had fabricated stories of abuse to avoid legal repercussions. The host nodded sympathetically, unaware or willfully ignoring the truth beneath the surface. "Do you still love her?" she asked at the end of the segment. Ethan looked straight into the camera, eyes glossy. "I just want my family back. But more than anything, I want Riley to get help." It didn't take long for the video to spread. Within an hour, clips were posted across every major social platform, edited for maximum emotional effect. The headlines followed. "Director pleads for estranged wife's recovery. Hollywood family implodes. Who's telling the truth?" But Keanu had seen it coming. He'd told Riley weeks earlier that this would happen, that someone like Ethan would never give up control quietly. As soon as the interview aired, Keanu's team activated their media protocol. They were done playing defense. Grace contacted trusted journalists and pushed verified documents, none leaked, all timed. Riley's medical records, reviewed by independent doctors, clearly showed years of psychological trauma, not substance abuse. Her therapy logs were organized, consistent, and dated before Ethan's TV appearance. The school records showed her children had near-perfect attendance until their disappearance. Teachers noted the children's affection and their mother's involvement. But it wasn't just paperwork. Former colleagues from Riley's stage days began speaking out. One by one, they posted on social media, recalling the way Ethan treated Riley during rehearsals when he directed, often belittling her in front of others or cutting her scenes without notice. One crew member even recalled seeing Ethan grab her arm backstage and shove her into a wall when no one else was watching. By noon, the narrative was shifting. The documentary hadn't even premiered, but the tide was turning. Hashtags started gaining traction. First it was "Believe Riley," then, more urgently, "Justice for Mothers." Thousands of women across the country began posting their own stories about narcissistic exes, custody battles rigged by money, years lost to silence. The safe house was quiet, but the energy in the room buzzed like an open wire. Riley sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, scrolling through hundreds of messages. One woman wrote, "Your story is mine. I've never told anyone until now. Thank you." Another, "I thought I was alone. You reminded me I'm not invisible." Riley's hands trembled as she read, not from fear, but from release, from the sheer flood of connection and recognition. She set the phone down and pressed both hands to her face. Tears came fast, not the kind that exploded in panic or grief, but the kind that rolled in quiet waves, healing tears, the kind that said, "You're not alone anymore." Keanu stood at the doorway and didn't say a word. He let her feel it, fully, and for the first time since they'd found her in that subway station, she wasn't shrinking. She was rising. By mid-afternoon, the air outside the safe house felt different, safer, warmer, even though the headlines were still spinning. Grace paced the living room, phone pressed to her ear, updating Keanu in short bursts. CNN just called. New York Times wants a comment. BBC picked it up. Keanu listened but didn't react. His eyes stayed on Riley, who now sat at the kitchen table with a mug of untouched tea, her phone set down for the first time in hours. Her children were in the other room, coloring together, their laughter barely audible through the cracked door. That laughter, that simple, natural sound, felt like a small miracle. Riley broke the silence. "Do you think I should respond?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Keanu didn't answer right away. He walked to the window, glanced through the blinds, then turned back to her. "You already did. You spoke the truth. The rest of the world is just catching up." Riley looked down. "It still doesn't feel real. I keep waiting for someone to come and rip all this away." Grace stepped closer. "They tried. They failed." Riley let that sink in. She looked at both of them. Keanu, the man who'd somehow found her again after decades, and Grace, a stranger who'd become her fiercest protector overnight. Then she looked back down at her hands and whispered, "I didn't know how much I needed to be seen." Grace walked over and gently placed a folder on the table. "You need to see this." Inside were printouts, screenshots of hundreds of direct messages, shared tweets, blog posts, all from women, some anonymous, some bold and unfiltered. Riley flipped through them, and each one was a mirror. Different names, different timelines, but the same thread. Women who'd been erased, silenced, gaslit, then made to feel like their own voices were the problem. She reached one message that stopped her cold. "My daughter's watching your interview on loop. She says she wants to be brave like you." Riley covered her mouth. Her shoulders trembled. Grace reached out, placing her hand over Riley's. "You're not just surviving anymore. You're leading." At that moment, Keanu's phone buzzed. He checked the screen. "It's starting," he said. The teaser clip of the documentary had gone live, a short 2-minute preview. It showed Riley seated in a soft-lit room, framed like a portrait. Her voice came through, clear, unshaking. "I'm not broken. I'm not ashamed. I'm a mother, and I've spent too long apologizing for someone else's lies." No music, no cuts, just her voice, raw and real. In under 15 minutes, the clip had reached 100,000 views. An hour later, it had doubled. Then came the comments, not just from ordinary viewers, but from people with large platforms. Authors, therapists, activists, and even a few celebrities. A well-known actress who had worked with Ethan over a decade ago reposted the clip with the caption, "He did the same to me. I didn't speak, but Riley did. She's the storm." The safe house felt different again. Not louder, not chaotic, just alive. Keanu leaned in toward Riley. "They tried to bury you, but all they did was plant the seed." Riley met his eyes, no longer flinching. "Then let's grow something they can't tear down." That evening, the air inside the safe house was still. No interviews, no calls, no meetings. Just a quiet moment between all the noise. Riley sat by the small window in the guest room, the same blanket wrapped around her shoulders from the first night she arrived. But tonight she didn't feel like someone hiding. She held her daughter's hand while her son dozed against her side. Keanu walked in, careful not to disturb them. He had something in his hand, an envelope. He placed it gently on the table near her and sat down across from her, not saying anything at first. "What is it?" Riley asked softly. "Letters," he replied. Grace printed a few more. "Messages you haven't seen yet." Riley hesitated, then reached for them. She opened the first one. It was from a woman in Idaho. "You're the reason I finally packed a bag and left. I've been scared for years, but after watching you speak, I remembered I'm still a person. Thank you." The second was from a teenage girl in Ohio. "My stepdad always said no one would believe me. Then I saw your clip. Now I believe myself." Riley didn't finish the rest. She folded the letters neatly and looked up at Keanu. "I never wanted to be a symbol," she whispered. "I don't think you are," Keanu said gently. "You're just real. That's what people are responding to." Riley shook her head, fighting tears. "I used to be so sure of who I was, on stage, in front of the camera. I had purpose. Then I became a mother, and that purpose grew. But when Ethan took everything, I forgot how to speak in my own voice. I became quiet. I let the silence grow around me." Keanu's voice was steady. "And now you've broken that silence, not just for yourself, but for so many others." Just then, Grace knocked gently and stepped in. Her phone was in her hand. "Sorry to interrupt, you need to see this." She turned the screen toward them. The full interview had just gone live. Already it was being shared by national outlets. In the corner of the screen, hashtags climbed the trending charts. "Believe Eiley," "Justice for Mothers," "Let Her Speak." Grace tapped one more time and showed a map of the U.S. The video was trending in all 50 states. Riley looked at the screen, stunned. This many people? Keanu smiled, not with pride but with peace. This is what truth does when it's finally allowed to breathe. Riley looked at her children, still resting beside her, and for the first time in months, a full breath filled her lungs. She stood slowly, walked over to the small mirror above the dresser, and met her own eyes. "I'm not afraid of him anymore," she said. Behind her, Keanu rose too. "Good, because he's afraid of you now." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full. Riley reached out, picked up the final letter in the envelope, and held it to her chest. Grateful, seen, and finally, no longer alone. The rehearsal room was quiet, holding a weight no one dared disturb. Keanu stood near the far wall, arms loosely folded, watching Riley stare at the script in her hands. She hadn't said yes yet, not officially. The stage reading was 3 days away, a small charity event meant to raise funds for an outreach program for single mothers. But since the documentary trailer aired, media outlets had swarmed the event like bees to sugar. What was once a modest gathering of theater lovers had suddenly become a national moment. Riley still hadn't told Keanu if she was going through with it. The script trembled slightly in her fingers. It wasn't the lines, she knew them. They'd rehearsed this play together over 2 decades ago in a dimly lit corner of a New York theater. Back then, Riley had been the seasoned professional guiding a jittery, wide-eyed Keanu. Now their roles had reversed, though he never made her feel like that. Instead, he stood patiently, saying nothing, just waiting, present, steady, unmoving. "Riley?" came a small voice from the hallway. Her son, Jonah, peeked in, clutching a peanut butter sandwich and a slightly rumpled drawing. His little sister Ivy followed, her eyes bright, ponytail lopsided. "You okay?" Jonah asked. Riley didn't answer right away. She lowered the script, running her thumb across the page, as if trying to smooth out a wrinkle that wasn't there. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's been a long time." "You used to love the stage," Jonah said softly. "You said it made you feel real." Riley blinked, surprised. "I did say that, didn't I?" He nodded. Then he stepped closer and handed her the drawing. A sketch of a stage, curtains drawn open, and a figure standing alone beneath a large light. Above it were scrawled words in his careful, uneven handwriting. "Mom, I want to see you shine." The script fell to her side. Her chest tightened. She knelt, hugged her son fiercely, then pulled Ivy into the embrace. When she looked over their heads toward Keanu, he gave a quiet nod, as if answering a question she hadn't asked aloud. That night, Riley sat on the balcony of the safe house, watching the city from a distance. Keanu joined her with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. They didn't speak for a while. The wind moved around them gently. The air didn't feel like fear anymore. It felt like possibility. "When we read this play years ago," she said, finally breaking the silence, I had no idea how much of it would follow me. Keanu didn't push her. He simply sipped his tea and waited. "I'm doing it," she said, voice steady. "Not because I'm ready, but because they need to see me not disappear." Keanu turned to her. "You never disappeared. The world just lost its focus." Riley exhaled. "Then let's help them see clearly." He raised his mug slightly. "To light." She touched hers to his. "To rising." The night of the reading arrived like a drumbeat Riley could feel in her chest hours before stepping into the theater. It was small, just under 200 seats, but tonight it might as well have been Carnegie Hall. Outside, cameras flashed. Crowds gathered, not because of her name, but because of the one beside hers on the flyer. Keanu Reeves. Still, the anticipation buzzing in the room wasn't for him, it was for her. Grace had arranged everything perfectly. A car arrived precisely on time. A stylist, discreet and kind, helped Riley into a simple navy dress and minimal makeup. Nothing flashy, just enough to let her feel visible again. Keanu met her at the backstage entrance. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know," she answered, smiling faintly. "But I'm here." "That's enough," he said. In the green room, Riley paced. Her hands shook again, not from fear of forgetting lines, but fear of being seen too deeply. Theater had always been a safe place to disappear into someone else, but tonight was different. These words were hers now. They rang louder, sharper, with new weight. Her children sat in the front row. Her story had been aired to the world. There was nothing to hide behind. One of the organizers knocked gently. 10 minutes. Riley looked at Keanu. He stepped forward and placed both hands on her shoulders. "No one's expecting perfection," he said. "They're here for your truth." She swallowed hard. "Truth has teeth." Keanu smiled. "So do you." When her name was announced, she almost didn't move. Then Jonah's voice called out quietly, "Go, Mom." That was all it took. She stepped into the wings and stood behind the curtain. The spotlight hit center stage. A single chair and a bound copy of the play rested on a small table. It was familiar, comforting. Then the curtain drew back. The applause hit like a wave, gentle but full. No one shouted, no one clapped for celebrity. It was a human ovation, warm and sincere. Riley walked slowly toward the chair. Her footsteps echoed, each one steadier than the last. She picked up the script, but didn't open it right away. For a long moment she stood silent, letting the light bathe her face. The stage was sacred ground. She remembered now. It wasn't about being flawless. It was about being real. Then she began. Her voice didn't shake. The first lines carried like they were tied to her breath, her past, her pain, her resilience. The audience leaned in. Keanu watched from the wings, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on her. With every sentence, Riley grew stronger. She wasn't acting, she was revealing. Backstage, the stage manager whispered to Keanu, "She's not performing, she's testifying." He nodded but didn't reply. Because in that moment, Riley Ward wasn't a woman recovering from ruin. She was an artist reclaiming her space in the world. And no one could look away. The final pages of the script came closer. Riley barely looked down anymore. The words were embedded now. In muscle. In soul. She could feel her younger self watching from somewhere in the wings. That hungry girl who once dreamed of Broadway, who never imagined her story would end up like this. But tonight wasn't the end. It was the rewrite. She reached the monologue. The room hushed to a deeper silence. Phones lowered, heads tilted forward. Even the crew stopped breathing. "I used to think silence meant weakness," she said, her voice steady. "That if I wasn't loud enough, strong enough, angry enough, I'd disappear. But I was wrong." She looked up, directly into the crowd. "Silence is a choice. And tonight, I choose to break it." Gasps rippled. Her eyes found Jonah and Mila. Her children watched with awe, no longer just as her kids, but as witnesses to their mother becoming something larger. She turned her body slightly as the final stage direction instructed, to face the audience straight on. And then came the final line. "I am not broken, just rebuilding." The air fractured with emotion. For 1 second, it seemed no one could move, not even blink. Then, as if pulled by gravity, the crowd rose as one. Applause thundered, echoing off the walls like waves crashing against stone. Some clapped with fists clenched to their hearts. Others simply wept. Backstage, Keanu lowered his head and closed his eyes. Riley bowed once, then stepped back. The curtain didn't close. She didn't need it. She walked off stage into the arms of her children, who leapt at her, cheering, hugging her waist, crying into her shoulder. "You were amazing," Jonah said, voice cracking. "You didn't shake once," Mila whispered. Riley laughed through her tears. "That's because you were both right there." Keanu stepped toward her, and for the first time in decades, Riley embraced him first. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't respond right away. He just nodded, like the moment didn't need words. Later that evening, news outlets would air clips from the performance. Reviewers would call it the most authentic piece of theater in years. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that Riley Ward, once lost to the margins of the world, had stood in the light, completely, unapologetically, and told her story, not for pity, not for redemption, but because her voice still worked. And this time, she wasn't letting anyone steal it again. The headlines wouldn't say, "Keanu saves homeless actress." They'd say, "Riley Ward returns." And for the first time in years, Riley believed it. She wasn't broken, just rebuilding, and the world was finally watching. The glow from the courtroom's tall windows cast long shadows across the floor as the hearing began. It was early morning, and the air inside was heavy with tension. Riley sat stiffly in her chair, dressed in a modest navy suit. Her hands clutched the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her from drifting into panic. Keanu sat beside her, calm but alert, his presence grounding her. Across the aisle, Ethan entered with two sharp-dressed attorneys. His confidence oozed with the same arrogance he wore back in his Hollywood days. He looked Riley up and down, smirked, and turned to whisper something to his lawyer. Riley stiffened. The judge, a composed woman in her 50s, took the bench and looked over the case file. "We are here to determine emergency custody for the minors in question," she said, her voice crisp. Ethan's legal team wasted no time. They opened with photos, old paparazzi shots of Riley on the streets, huddled under blankets with her children, accompanied by headlines that screamed of addiction and instability. They painted a picture of neglect, of a woman unfit to parent. "She disappeared for months," Ethan's lawyer argued. "She was unstable, homeless, and left her children vulnerable. Mr. Ward has both the financial means and professional stability to raise them in a healthy environment." Riley's chest tightened with every word. She felt her throat close, as if years of silence were trying to crawl back inside her. Then Keanu stood. The courtroom hushed. People turned. He took a quiet step forward, adjusted the microphone, and looked straight at the judge. "My name is Keanu Reeves," he began. "I am here not as an actor or a public figure, but as someone who owes his beginnings to the woman sitting beside me." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "When I was 24, I walked into an audition I was too scared to attempt. I didn't know how to speak from the heart. I didn't know who I was yet. Riley Ward taught me how to find my voice. She gave me strength when I didn't even believe I belonged in the room." He looked over at Riley, then back to the judge. "For years, she has lived in silence, out of fear. Not just of losing her children, but of being erased. She didn't fall apart. She was dismantled by a system that protects the powerful. The judge leaned forward slightly. Even Ethan's lawyers went quiet. Keanu continued, "She is not unfit. She is not unstable. She is a mother who fought, who survived, and who is just now finding her footing again. These children need her, and she needs them." Riley closed her eyes, tears falling silently as the words she never thought she'd hear spoken in a courtroom filled the room. The judge took a long breath. Her eyes drifted down to the documents before her, then back up to Ethan. "Mr. Ward, would you like to respond directly?" Ethan rose, smiling like he was in front of a camera, not a court. "Your Honor, I have no doubt that Ms. Ward was once a fine teacher. But people change. We're talking about the well-being of children. I've built a stable life. I have a home. I can provide what she cannot." He gestured toward Riley dismissively. "What she has is chaos and pity. That's not a foundation for parenting." Riley flinched. But then Grace, Keanu's assistant, stepped forward. She had testified earlier, but now she returned with a sealed folder. With the judge's permission, she handed it over. "Your Honor," Grace said, her voice steady, "we've obtained records previously suppressed by settlement. They include multiple reports of emotional abuse, threats, and witness statements from theater colleagues corroborating Mr. Ward's behavior toward." The judge raised an eyebrow as she flipped through the pages. Ethan's expression shifted, his jaw tensed. Grace continued, "We've also included therapy records, verified by the children's school counselor, showing Riley has been in consistent treatment. The kids are healthy. They're doing well. They are safe." Ethan's attorney stood, trying to object, but the judge raised a hand. "I'll allow it." She turned back to Keanu. "No more question, Mr. Reeves. You are not family. You don't share blood with these children. Why are you here?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Because I owe Riley everything, and because when someone saves your soul, you don't walk away when they're drowning. You stay." Silence. Even the court clerk stopped typing. Riley looked over at her children, who sat in the back corner of the courtroom with a social worker. Her son offered a timid thumbs up. Her daughter smiled faintly, gripping her stuffed animal. The judge closed the file and folded her hands. "I've seen enough." A breath caught in Riley's chest. "In the interest of the children's stability and in light of the new evidence presented, I hereby grant full custody to Ms. Riley Ward. All pending actions filed by Mr. Ethan Ward are denied." Riley didn't move. She couldn't. The words hadn't registered. The judge stood. "This hearing is concluded." Ethan shot to his feet. "This isn't over." But the bailiff stepped in his path as he tried to approach the bench. "Sir, you need to leave." He turned his glare to Riley, eyes burning with resentment. "You'll regret this." Keanu took a single step forward, quiet but firm. She's not alone anymore. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun was soft and golden, a sharp contrast to the storm that had raged inside. Reporters waited behind metal barricades, their cameras flashing the moment the doors opened. Keanu stepped out first, shielding Riley and the kids from the crowd. He said nothing, just walked with them, steady, focused. Riley was trembling, not from fear anymore, but from release. Her knees gave slightly as she reached the steps, and Keanu caught her gently, holding her upright. "It's over," she whispered, barely audible over the noise. Keanu leaned in close. "No, Riley. It's just beginning." For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. As they reached the black SUV, Grace opened the door and helped the children inside. Riley hesitated, looking back toward the courthouse one last time. Then she turned to Keanu. "You didn't have to stay." "I know," he said quietly. "But I wanted to." They drove in silence for a while. The kids sat in the back, heads leaning together, half asleep from the weight of the day. Riley stared out the window, watching New York pass by as if it were an entirely new city. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. "What's this?" "A casting notice for an off-Broadway revival. The same play you helped me rehearse all those years ago." She looked at him in disbelief. "Anybody want me?" 1991, he said. "When they see what you can still do." She opened the paper, read the title, and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The play, the one that had started it all. A story about loss, rebuilding, and voice, just like hers. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good," Keanu said. "That means it matters." That night, Riley stood in front of the mirror in her safe house bedroom, brushing her hair while her children slept soundly in the next room. She looked different. Not younger, not older, just present, whole. From the hallway, she heard Keanu's voice, low and warm, reading a bedtime story to her son. A voice that once echoed across stages and screens, now grounding itself in the quiet truth of this moment. She wiped a tear from her cheek. Not one of sorrow, not one of fear, but one of something else. Oh, she wasn't running anymore. She was stepping into the light. Riley stood on the creaking porch of the small house in upstate New York, her arms wrapped around her two children. The key still trembled slightly in her hand. She hadn't owned a key to anything in nearly a year. The mailbox bore no name. The front door was freshly painted, but what struck her most was the silence. Not the kind that gnawed at her on cold subway benches, but a warm, waiting kind. A silence filled with possibility. She pushed the door open. The hinges didn't groan. The living room smelled faintly of cedarwood and lemon, like someone had prepared it carefully, lovingly. Inside, the furniture was simple and used, but clean. A small wooden dining table sat in the corner, with mismatched chairs surrounding it. On the kitchen counter was a note, written in blocky handwriting, "Welcome home." No signature, no need. The kids ran from room to room, laughing, their socked feet patting against the worn hardwood. "This one's mine," her daughter shouted, diving onto a twin bed with a faded sunflower quilt. Her son inspected the backyard through a dusty glass pane. "There's a tree big enough to climb," he yelled. Riley walked slowly through the space, brushing her fingers over the windowsill, the light switch, the chipped edge of a dresser. Each touch felt like stitching herself back together. When she stepped into the tiny study at the back of the house, she stopped. Against the far wall was a small bookshelf, and above it, hanging crookedly, was a black and white photo. It was from the first stage play she'd ever performed in. She blinked hard, then walked forward and straightened it gently. Outside, the last hints of evening light spread gold across the field behind the house. Riley stepped onto the back porch and exhaled. For the first time in months, she wasn't bracing for something to go wrong. She sat in one of the two wooden rocking chairs and leaned back, slowly. The wood sighed under her, but didn't break. Later that evening, she heard a familiar car pull into the gravel driveway. Her kids were already racing toward it, their laughter echoing across the yard. Keanu stepped out of the car, smiling, as they launched into his arms. Keanu carried the youngest on his hip as they walked back toward the porch. The boy clung to him naturally, like it had always been that way. Riley stood, brushing off her jeans, still unsure whether to thank him again or just let the moment breathe. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly as they reached the porch steps. Keanu gave her a half smile. "I know, but I wanted to." They sat around a small fire pit that Keanu had helped set up earlier that afternoon. The flames flickered gently, casting soft orange light on their faces. The kids giggled as they roasted marshmallows on long sticks, burning some, dropping others, laughing anyway. It was messy and perfect. The kind of night Riley had thought she'd never have again. Keanu sat beside her, holding a mug of tea between his hands. He looked out at the quiet woods just beyond the fence. "This place, it reminded me of somewhere I always imagined growing up," he said. "Not a real place, just something from my head. I thought maybe..." You should have that too. Riley looked at the children, now leaning against each other, their bellies full and eyes starting to droop with sleep. The stillness was overwhelming, not in a heavy way, but like a song winding down to its final, perfect note. I never had a real home growing up, she said, voice low, almost ashamed. Not really. Just stages and suitcases and people who left. Keanu turned to her, expression soft and unflinching. Then let's build one, he said. Memory by memory. For a long while they didn't speak, just the sound of the fire crackling, a cricket chirping somewhere in the field, and the breeze gently swaying the old oak out back. Riley leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment, just listening. She didn't know what would come next. There were still hearings, interviews, noise, but here in this little slice of silence, she could finally hear her own voice again. Not the stage voice, not the terrified one, just her. And it was strong. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Riley walked Keanu out to his car. The driveway was lined with soft garden lights she had picked out from a thrift store, little glass jars glowing like fireflies. She crossed her arms over her chest, the night air cool but comforting. I keep waiting for the ground to fall out from under me, she said honestly. Like this is all a dream I'm not allowed to keep. Keanu leaned against the car door and looked at her. It's not a dream, Riley. It's your life. You just finally got the pen back. She smiled, though it trembled. I'm scared I won't know what to write. He shook his head gently. You already are. She stepped forward and hugged him, tight, grateful, without hesitation. He returned it, with the same quiet strength that had carried her through the storm. There were no cameras here, no headlines. Just two people who remembered who they used to be and chose not to let each other disappear. As Keanu opened the car door, her voice stopped him. Thank you. Not just for the house, for seeing me. Again. He turned back, eyes soft. You were never hard to see, Riley. Just hidden by people who wanted the light for themselves. Then he drove off, disappearing down the tree-lined road. She stood there a moment longer, arms wrapped around herself, eyes on the stars. Inside, her children slept in warm beds. Their drawings covered the refrigerator. The heater rattled just a little, and the hallway light flickered. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. She walked back in, locked the door behind her, and stood in the living room, barefoot on the old rug, heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. She picked up a small photo frame from the windowsill. It held a new picture, her with the kids, smiling in the backyard, sun pouring down like a promise. This wasn't just a safe place, it was home, and for the first time in a long time she believed she deserved it. It was a rainy Thursday morning when Riley found it. She had been sorting through a weathered shoebox buried in the back of the hallway closet, the kind of box you move from place to place but never quite open. Inside were loose photos, ticket stubs, yellowed Polaroids of her on stage, and a folded piece of lined paper, aged and creased from years of neglect. Her hands trembled as she opened it. One glance at the handwriting and she remembered everything. It was a letter she had written more than 2 decades ago. A thank you note to Keanu. Her eyes scanned the first lines slowly, as if the ink might vanish if she read too quickly. She had written it in the quiet after he landed his breakout role. After the long rehearsals, the late-night monologue coaching sessions, and the tearful conversations when she reminded him not to give up. Back then, he had been unsure, self-conscious, and constantly second-guessing himself. She remembered slipping the letter into her purse one night, intending to send it, but she never did. She hadn't believed she mattered enough. Or maybe she just didn't believe anyone would care what she had to say. Now, all these years later, she folded the letter with care and walked outside to the backyard where Keanu was stacking firewood with her son. His jacket was flecked with ash and pine needles. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, his expression softening instantly. "Got a minute?" she asked. He nodded and brushed his hands off on his jeans. She handed him the letter without a word. Keanu looked at it, recognizing the faded paper and the delicate looping script. His brow furrowed slightly as he opened it. Then he read. The world around them grew still. Her children's laughter echoed faintly from the treehouse, but even that felt distant. Keanu stood silent for a long moment after he finished. He folded the letter gently, as though it were made of glass. Then, without hesitation, he pulled out his wallet and slipped the note into a small inner pocket. Riley blinked. "You're keeping it?" He looked at her and nodded. "I keep very few things in there. This deserves to be one of them." She exhaled, the weight in her chest loosening. "I wrote it when I thought you'd disappear from my life forever." "I wish you'd sent it," he said quietly. She hesitated, voice nearly a whisper. "I wasn't ready to be seen." He studied her for a long second. "You are now." She didn't reply. Her throat was too tight, but she stepped forward and hugged him. Not like before. Not the kind of hug that says thank you or goodbye. This one said something else. It said, "I'm still here. I'm not invisible anymore, and I'm ready to live." Later that evening, after the kids had gone to sleep and the house was wrapped in quiet, Keanu sat by the kitchen table with a mug of tea in front of him. Riley joined him, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. Outside, a soft drizzle tapped against the windows. The whole world felt like it was exhaling. "I didn't think you'd remember me," she said after a long pause. Keanu looked up. "I remembered the way you made me feel. Safe, seen. That doesn't fade." Riley smiled faintly, brushing her fingers along the wooden grain of the table. "You were just a kid with too many thoughts in your head and not enough faith in your gut. And you were the only person who saw past all that," Keanu said. "I don't know if I ever told you, but after that first role, the director asked me where I learned to cry on cue. I told him I wasn't acting. I was thinking about someone who believed in me before I did." She turned toward him, startled by the memory. "That was you," he said. "It's always been you." The silence that followed was full, not empty, but overflowing. Years of questions and apologies that no longer needed to be spoken. Riley leaned back in her chair. "There were nights I almost mailed that letter. I had stamps, envelopes, I even wrote your agent's address on the front once." "What stopped you?" She shrugged. "Pride, shame, fear, take your pick." He nodded slowly. "We all have moments we let pass us by. But sometimes, the letter shows up when we need it most." Riley reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a smaller note, something she'd scribbled just hours ago on the back of a grocery receipt. "Today I wrote a new letter," she said, "to myself. It just says, you're allowed to rebuild. You don't need permission." Keanu reached out and took the note gently from her fingers. He smiled and set it next to his tea. "Frame that, or better yet, teach it to your kids." Riley chuckled, her voice trembling. "You know, my daughter asked me last night if I was ever famous." "What did you tell her?" "I said once, a long time ago, I was almost somebody." Keanu shook his head. "No, you were never almost. You were everything." She looked down at her lap, trying to compose herself. "You keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Giving me pieces of myself I thought I lost." He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Instead, he stood, walked over to the cabinet, and pulled down a small wooden box. It was a keepsake from a film they had both loved, a play adaptation that never made it to stage. He opened the box and revealed 2 tickets from an old rehearsal night, still intact. "I saved these," he said. "I always thought one day we'd finish the show." She stared at them, stunned. "You kept them all this time?" "I hoped we'd meet again. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I believed." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't from grief. They were from gratitude. Riley stood in the middle of the dusty church basement, staring at the mismatched chairs and the chipped paint on the walls. It didn't look like much, but to her, it was everything. This was where the new program would begin. A community theater just for women like her. Women who had been silenced. Women who had been told their stories didn't matter. The idea had come to her one evening while helping her son paint a backdrop for a school play. He had turned to her, paintbrush in hand, and said, "You used to do this all the time, right?" She had smiled, but something inside her had ached. Yes, she used to live for the stage. Now, maybe, it was time to live through it again. Keanu had offered her a larger venue, a better location, a real budget. But Riley had insisted this had to be grassroots. It had to feel like it belonged to the women, not to some celebrity. Keanu understood. He didn't argue. Instead, he quietly paid the rental fees, stocked the fridge, and dropped off warm lights and theater mats without ever leaving a name. Riley knew who was behind it, and she loved him for not needing the credit. The first session had only 3 women. One brought her baby. Another was still wearing her uniform from a hotel cleaning job. The third had a black eye she refused to explain. Riley didn't ask questions. She simply invited them to sit in a circle. She handed out blank scripts. Then she said, "Let's write something that no one can take from us." They looked unsure. But Riley had been there, afraid of her own voice. She began with a story of her own, short and trembling, about losing herself and slowly clawing her way back. Then, one by one, the women began to speak. Not fluently, not confidently, but honestly. And that was more than enough. By the second week, 6 women came. Then, 10. They brought friends. They brought kids. They brought pain. And in that little church basement, they also found something else. Hope. Riley arrived early each session, laying out chairs, printing scripts, and taping encouragement notes on the walls. Simple things like "You matter" and "Take up space." Her daughter helped design a tiny logo, a cracked mask being stitched together with golden thread. They named the group Second Act. It felt right. Not a sequel, not a comeback, just a continuation of something never finished. Keanu visited once, quietly slipping into the back row as the women rehearsed a piece they had written together. No one recognized him. He wore a cap and carried takeout for everyone. When Riley introduced him simply as a friend, the women clapped for the food and got right back to rehearsing. Keanu smiled, sat down, and watched in silence. Later, as they walked out together under the city's flickering street lamps, he said, "This is bigger than you know." Riley looked up at him. "It's small, Keanu. It's just a room and some folding chairs." He shook his head. "No, it's not. It's breath for people who've been holding it too long." That night, she wrote the quote down in her notebook and taped it above her bed. Soon, local newspapers picked up the story. "Single mother builds theater for survivors." The article showed photos of the women laughing during rehearsals, holding their children between lines. The piece went viral, not because of celebrity, but because it was real. Riley started getting emails from women across the country. Some wanted to join. Others wanted to start their own versions. A theater professor from Vermont offered to send donated scripts. A drama therapist from LA asked if she could fly in and volunteer. Still, Riley refused to let it become polished or corporate. She made sure everyone who stepped into that space felt like they belonged. Not because they were healed, but because they were healing. Every week ended with the same ritual. They stood in a circle, held hands, and spoke a single phrase together. "This is not the end of our story." And each time, Riley felt her voice grow stronger. Not the performer's voice, not the actress's, just hers. On the final night of their first production, the small community theater buzzed with nervous energy. Friends, neighbors, and local families packed the folding chairs. There was no red carpet, no sponsors, no media, Just handwritten programs and a room full of hearts hoping to be heard. Riley stood backstage, dressed in a simple black dress with no makeup, holding her daughter's tiny hand for strength. Her son peeked through the curtain and whispered, "Mom, they're all here. You did this." She took a deep breath. "No, we did." The lights dimmed. The curtain rose. Each scene told a different story. A woman finding her voice in court. Another standing in front of a mirror for the first time, without flinching. Laughter echoed. Tears fell. But no one looked away. The rawness was the point. This wasn't acting. This was remembering. Reclaiming. When Riley stepped forward for the final monologue, there was a long silence before she even spoke. She looked out at the audience, then at her kids, then straight ahead. "I used to believe broken things should be hidden, that if I couldn't be whole, I couldn't be worthy. But someone once told me," she paused, "we are not what happened to us. We are what we choose next." She took another breath. Her voice didn't shake this time. "Your story isn't over. It's just your intermission." A hush settled. Then, one by one, the audience stood, some wiping their eyes, others clapping softly, then louder. Applause that didn't stop. Applause not just for the performance, but for the truth. Backstage, Keanu waited quietly in the wings. He didn't clap. He just watched her with that same look he'd had all those years ago, when a nervous young man was guided by a woman who believed in voices that hadn't yet found themselves. When Riley finally stepped off stage, breathless and overwhelmed, she didn't cry. She smiled. For once, she wasn't disappearing. She wasn't surviving. She was seen, and not as a victim, not as a lost name, but as a lighthouse. And in the warmth of that moment, she finally knew. She had stepped into her own light. The invitation came printed on thick ivory cardstock, sealed with gold embossing. Riley turned it over in her hands again and again, hardly believing it was real. A national summit. Women in the arts. Keynote speaker, Riley Ward. Just 10 months ago, she'd been sleeping under the F-line overpass with her children huddled on either side. Now she was being asked to tell her story to an auditorium full of filmmakers, playwrights, and advocates. Her hands trembled as she read it out loud to the kids. Her son grinned and said, "You're going to be amazing." Her daughter clapped and danced in place. Riley didn't say much. Instead, she sat quietly on the floor of their modest living room, sunlight painting golden lines across the rug. The journey felt impossible, and yet, here she was. A new home, her children safe, her voice restored. Keanu came by that evening. He brought homemade soup and a stack of books on public speaking, some marked with sticky notes. Riley hugged him tight and whispered, "I don't know if I can do this." Keanu didn't lecture or cheer. He just looked her in the eye and said, "You already did." The summit was held in Washington, D.C., inside an ornate theater with a domed ceiling and velvet curtains. The moment they arrived, Riley clutched her daughter's hand like a lifeline. Her son, now taller than her, carried her notes. She didn't have a stylist or a glam squad, just a thrifted navy dress, her mother's bracelet, and the quiet dignity of someone who had survived. Backstage, she waited alone until she heard a soft knock. Keanu stepped in, wearing his usual black suit, no tie. He gave a nod, not intruding. "Just came to say, no matter what happens out there, I'm proud of you." Riley nodded, but didn't speak. Her throat was too tight. The announcer's voice echoed, "Please welcome our keynote speaker, Riley Ward." She took a deep breath, then stepped into the light. The applause was warm and immediate, but it wasn't the kind that overwhelmed her. It was the kind that held her, like open arms. Riley stepped up to the podium and looked out into the audience. Rows of women. Some in power suits, some in headscarves, some holding notebooks. some holding hands. All of them waiting. She unfolded her notes, then paused. She looked down, then back up. "I once lived in a subway station," she began softly. "Now I live in the light." There was a hush, a stillness that seemed to freeze time. "I'm not here because I clawed my way out alone. I'm here because someone saw me when I didn't want to be seen. Because someone remembered my name when I'd forgotten how to say it." She looked toward the side of the stage where Keanu stood in shadow. "But even before that," she continued, "I'm here because my children needed me, and I couldn't be invisible anymore, not to them." A few people dabbed at their eyes. Others leaned forward, drawn in. "I was an actress once," she said. "And then I became a mother. And then I became no one. I lost my career, my marriage, my safety, but I didn't lose my fire. It just burned quietly, waiting." She glanced down at her notes, but she didn't need them anymore. "This isn't a story about rescue," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It's a story about recognition, about what happens when someone refuses to let you disappear, when they hold space for your story until you're strong enough to speak it yourself." From backstage, Keanu's hands were folded tightly, his jaw tense. He wasn't used to crying in public. But tonight, he didn't. Riley smiled, gently. "To every woman out there who's ever been silenced, I say this: your story is not over. It's just your intermission." A soft gasp moved through the crowd, followed by a powerful wave of applause. Some people stood. The children peeked from behind the curtain, watching their mother beam. Riley stepped back from the microphone, but the standing ovation kept rising, wave after wave. She stood still for a moment, soaking it in, unsure whether to bow or simply breathe. Her daughter ran onto the stage first, arms outstretched. Then her son, holding a crumpled drawing of her on stage, colored with bright yellow lights. Riley dropped to her knees and pulled them both in. The crowd's clapping turned into cheers. Backstage, Keanu wiped at his eyes and turned away, just for a second. A stagehand near him whispered, "That was the most honest thing I've ever seen." He nodded once, not trusting his voice. Then a producer came up to him, microphone in hand. "Mr. Reeves, if we could get a word about tonight's speaker?" Keanu looked out toward Riley, still on stage, surrounded by warmth. They turned the camera on him. The producer asked gently, "You helped her. You saved her. How does it feel seeing her like this?" He didn't speak right away. When he did, it was quiet. "No, she saved herself," he said. "I just made sure the world saw it." And then, instead of walking toward the spotlight, he stepped further back into the curtain's edge, into shadow. He knew the story was never supposed to be about him. Later that night at the hotel, Riley stood on the rooftop terrace, barefoot, holding a mug of herbal tea. The kids had fallen asleep in their matching pajamas, tired from all the excitement. The city lights twinkled in the distance, soft and forgiving. Keanu joined her there. No cameras, no press. We're two friends in silence. "I meant every word," Riley said. "I know," Keanu replied. "And the world heard you." She exhaled deeply. "I didn't think I ever would be more than forgotten." "You never were," he said, staring out into the skyline. "You were just waiting to return." Riley looked up at the stars, a small smile forming. "It feels like I'm finally home. But it's not just the place. It's the people." Keanu nodded slowly. "That's all home really is." They stood quietly for a while, the kind of quiet that feels like peace, not absence. Then Riley turned and whispered, "Thank you." Keanu didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The city moved on below them, but up on that terrace, under that soft midnight sky, something had come full circle. Riley had stepped back into her story, and this time she was writing it herself. The sun was low when Riley pulled into the driveway of her modest home, a soft wind brushing through the trees that surrounded the property. Her kids ran ahead, their backpacks bouncing as they raced to the door, already arguing playfully over who would pick the movie that night. Keanu followed behind her, holding a wrapped package in his hands, unaware that inside it was something that would live on his desk for the rest of his life. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and pine. Riley had baked earlier, and the kitchen was still warm from it. A stack of second-hand books sat on the table, dog-eared and scribbled in. Her son had left a paper crown on one of the chairs, and her daughter's drawing, a star with the words, "Mom is my hero," was taped to the fridge. Keanu set the package down on the table. Riley turned to him, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I've been holding on to this for a while," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure when the right moment would be." He didn't ask what it was. He just smiled and waited. She unwrapped it slowly. Beneath the layers of recycled paper was a simple wooden frame. Inside was a photograph: Riley, her 2 kids, and Keanu standing in front of the little house. It was candid. Her daughter was laughing. Her son had his arms wrapped around Keanu's leg. Riley's smile was gentle, peaceful. There was sunlight behind them, catching in the trees and softening everything. At the bottom of the frame, in careful handwriting, was a short message: "To the man who remembered me." Keanu stared at the photo for a long time. Then he nodded, as if something inside him had settled into place. "This means more than you know," he said. Riley looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "You gave us a second chance, not just at safety, but at belonging." Keanu picked up the frame, held it in both hands, and studied it again. "You gave that to yourself. I just stood close enough to see it." Riley didn't argue. She didn't need to. They both knew the truth sat somewhere in the middle. He carried the frame back to his car in silence. That evening, back in his Los Angeles home, Keanu sat at his writing desk, the frame now resting just to the right of his notebook. The desk was old, scratched with time, and filled with quiet rituals. Candles he never lit, a single fountain pen, and a stack of journals worn at the edges. But now, with that photo beside them, it felt like something sacred had been added. He leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet settle. Outside his window, the city buzzed softly, but inside it was still, peaceful. He looked at the photo again, the sunlight caught in Riley's hair, the kids beaming, his own face looking both surprised and deeply content. It didn't look like a man doing a good deed. It looked like family. The words at the bottom of the frame echoed in his chest. "To the man who remembered me." He remembered everything. The cold subway station where he'd first seen her again. The cracked pavement beneath his knees when he spoke her name. Her son's question, "Mom, who is this man?" He remembered the way she'd denied her own name, not out of shame, but fear. How long had she been hiding in plain sight? How many people had passed her without looking? He remembered her trembling hands when she stepped onto the stage, the fire in her voice when she told the world, "I am not broken, just rebuilding." He thought about how often the world forgot women like Riley, how it dismissed the ones who carried silent burdens, who chose survival over attention, who taught others to shine, even as their own light dimmed. Keanu opened his journal. On the first blank page, he sat for a moment, then began to write. "She was the light in my darkest room. Now, she's her own star." He paused, ran his fingers along the edge of the frame. Keem reminded me that remembering someone isn't just about recalling a name. It's about honoring their struggle, seeing their whole journey, and holding space for their return. Riley didn't need saving. She needed to be seen. He set the pen down. Then he reached for the photo again, his thumb brushing across the wood. And he smiled. The next morning, sunlight poured across Keanu's writing desk, washing the photo in a golden hue. He sat there again, coffee in hand, staring at the frame as if trying to memorize every detail. It wasn't just a photo anymore. It was a reminder of what mattered. a moment frozen in time that held more truth than any award or accolade ever had. Later that day, Keanu received a call from Grace. She was coordinating a new scholarship Riley had inspired, funded anonymously by Keanu, of course, for single mothers pursuing careers in the performing arts. Riley didn't know about it yet. She'd only asked if Keanu could help get a few of the moms backstage passes to a theater show. Instead, he was building something permanent behind the scenes. Brick by brick, Grace said. Riley's teaching again this weekend. You should see the way the women light up around her. Keanu smiled quietly. I believe it. He hung up but didn't move from his chair. He opened the drawer beside him and pulled out the small stack of letters he'd kept over the years. Notes from people who'd changed his life. Some were from fans, some from crew members, some from old friends. And now, on top of that stack, he placed Riley's letter, the one she never mailed. It was the most honest piece of gratitude he'd ever received. And it wasn't just about him. It was about what we can be to each other. Shelters in the storm, mirrors in the dark, memory keepers when the world forgets. That evening, Keanu walked out onto his balcony. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the city. He looked up at the sky and thought about all the roles he'd played over the years. Heroes, warriors, lost men finding their way home. But none of them felt as real as the one he had now. Not as a celebrity, not as a savior, just as a man who remembered. And in remembering Riley, maybe he had remembered a piece of himself, too. He turned back inside, sat at the desk once more, and this time, before closing his journal, he wrote one final sentence. Sometimes the most important stories aren't the ones we write on screen, but the ones we hold in silence, beside the people who once helped us find our voice. He closed the book, his hand resting over the cover, and as the room darkened with the setting sun, the photo in the frame seemed to glow just a little, bright. The world forgot Riley Ward, but I didn't. And now, neither will you. Those were the words echoing in Keanu's mind as he sat quietly on the back porch of his home, the sky above him smeared with the fading blush of twilight. In his hands, he held a copy of the Summit program, dog-eared from being read over and over. On the front page was Riley, her hands mid-gesture, her face glowing with confidence. It wasn't the photo that moved him, it was what it meant. From a concrete subway shelter to the stage of a national summit, Riley had rewritten her own narrative. Not with fanfare, not with spectacle, but with every word she dared to speak, every step she took toward the light she had once been denied. A soft breeze stirred the edges of the program. Keanu closed it gently, stood, and stepped into his study. There, on his writing desk, stood the framed photo Riley had given him. Her and the kids, laughing in front of their new home. To the man who remembered me, the inscription said. He touched the edge of the frame, then pulled out his journal. He opened to a blank page and paused. Outside, the night settled in. Somewhere far away, Riley was probably tucking her children into bed, humming a lullaby she hadn't sung in years. He could picture it. She was the light in my darkest room, he wrote. Now, she's her own star. He set the pen down and smiled. The journey hadn't been about rescue. It hadn't been about fame or redemption. It had been about memory, about dignity, about bearing witness to someone's worth when the world refused to see it. He remembered that rainy morning when a quiet voice had said, "God bless you," and made him stop in his tracks. That voice had saved more than just a morning. It had brought him face to face with a truth that mattered more than anything else. Our smallest moments of recognition can become someone's first step out of the shadows. The following week, the documentary was released. It began with quiet, just ambient street noise and a single shot of a woman sitting on a subway bench, her arms wrapped around two sleeping children. Then Riley's voice, steady, worn, unflinching. She spoke of forgotten auditions, unpaid nights teaching drama, the man who promised everything and stripped her bare. But she also spoke of something deeper, how her children became her compass, how survival turned into purpose, and how a familiar face reminded her that invisibility wasn't permanent. Her words traveled fast. Women wrote in from cities and small towns. Letters poured into Keanu's office. Some were single mothers, some were daughters, some were men who had grown up watching their mothers fight alone. One comment read, "I watched this with my teenage son. He asked if we could volunteer at a shelter together." Another said, "For the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel ashamed of what I went through." Riley didn't become a celebrity. She didn't want to. But she became something more powerful, visible. At her community theater, a new mural was painted by one of the mothers in the program. It showed a subway station with light pouring in from above. In the center stood a woman holding the hands of two children, her face lifted toward the glow. At the top, in gold lettering, it read, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." And in the corner, almost hidden, was a tiny symbol, a single star, hand-drawn. Riley had signed it there, quietly, just for herself. That image would become iconic. It would be shared in classrooms and advocacy forums. It would be printed on flyers for women's shelters and emailed with subject lines that read, "Watch this if you feel alone." But back on the night it first premiered, there were only two people left, watching the final credits in silence. Keanu and Riley. They sat beside each other, hands folded, not saying a word. Because sometimes the most powerful stories don't need explaining. They just need to be seen.